Operation Avalanche. Operation Avalanche was a step up in production value for Johnson and Company, with an estimated production budget of $1,250,000, $1,240,000 more than the Dirties production budget that was just $10,000. The film was produced by Lionsgate. The story follows four CIA agents in the 1960s who go undercover at NASA in hopes of squeezing out a supposed Soviet informant at the time. However, upon their mission, they stumble upon one of the greatest conspiracies of all time, the faking of the US moon landing. So, quick precursor. I don't think the moon landing was faked. Matt Johnson and his crew have made it very clear throughout press in this movie that they also don't believe that the moon landing was faked. It was obviously very real. However, this movie is just kind of a historical fiction of the what if. And it does a very good job of making you think, if it would have been faked, that's probably how they would have done it. Again, like the Dirties, Operation Avalanche is a mockumentary, and a very believable one at that. However, pulling off 1960s NASA is a little bit of a harder task than a contemporary high school. So with a much larger budget and sharpened skills, Matt Johnson and his crew are able to pull off the 1960s seamlessly. And if one didn't know any better, you could absolutely believe that this was footage straight out of that decade. The movie was shot on location at NASA's Galveston campus, which fortunately has not changed much as it's considered a historical building. Although here's where things get a little interesting. So Matt Johnson and his crew were actually at NASA under slightly skewed pretenses. So NASA believed that Johnson and his crew were documentary filmmakers that were there to shoot a documentary and do research about NASA's facilities. They had no idea that they were actually shooting a narrative movie about the faking of the moon landing. All of that was kept secret, and so the entire movie, at least as far as the stuff that was shot on NASA's location, is all shot secretly. And so it's actually kind of funny because Matt Johnson said in an interview, because the entire time they were under the fear that production could be, they could just pull the rug out from under them if they were discovered at any time. Because they were playing undercover CIA agents that were actors who were also scared of being discovered for their real intentions, it lent itself to their performances perfectly. I mean, the characters and actors were a one-to-one. So the paranoia and the anxiety that you see the characters experiencing in the movie is probably pretty legitimate. And one of the main reasons why this whole production kind of was allowed to happen to begin with is because of the state of NASA at the time, and honestly now. NASA, it's no secret, is very underfunded, and they're not allowed to advertise themselves. So they are very open and willing to let any media, documentary crews, commercial crews, whatever, any creatives like that, they're very welcoming to open their doors and let them come in and shoot stuff and film around and interview people. So NASA had no problem letting Matt Johnson and his crew walk in, and they took full advantage of that. So I feel like it's important for me to kind of go into a little detail about the production of this movie, because as I'm explaining it, it sounds insane. I mean, it is insane. It's crazy. It's crazy that this movie came to be, that they got away with all of this. And a big reason for that is because a couple years before this movie came out, there was a film that was released called Escape from Tomorrow, and it was by a director named Randy Moore. And Matt Johnson met with Randy Moore, and he asked him all about this movie because the movie, it takes place, it's all shot in Disneyland, guerrilla style. So this entire movie, it's a horror film, and it's shot in Disneyland without Disney's approval, without their knowledge. And so when it's, getting ready for release, Disney, being Disney, is doing everything in their power to shut this movie down because it's a horror movie. It does not paint Disney or Disneyland in a good light, and so they wanted to get rid of it immediately. Well, the movie got distribution. It screened at festivals. It got a wide release, and it got DVD home video release as well. So it clearly didn't work out in Disney's favor. And the reason for that is because there was a creative lawyer named Chris Perez who worked on this movie, and he basically gave them a bulletproof backing that said as long as they shot the footage, they owned that footage. And because the movie was shot at Disneyland, the story revolves around Disneyland. So Disneyland served as a storytelling purpose. If you take it out, you lose the story. Therefore, it's free to stay, because without Disneyland, there's no movie. And so they got away with it. And to this day, we have Escape from Tomorrow out. I'm sure it's streaming places. I know it's come out on DVD. So it's very interesting that happened. So basically, Matt Johnson and his crew talked to Randy Moore. They got a hold of Chris Perez and they said, hey, can you give us the same treatment on Operation Avalanche? And he said, yeah, you're good to go. If you can shoot that footage without getting caught during the production, you're golden. So the first thing that's going to jump out to an audience member watching Operation Avalanche is the look of the movie. It was shot on 16mm on nearly destroyed film to give it its vintage, classic style film. There's just so much to this movie's production that I want to share before we even get into the story. I mean, it's the behind the scenes of this movie is just as interesting as the actual movie itself, which is still incredible. Like a stray example was when Matt Johnson and his crew left NASA, they asked NASA for the lunar module schematics, and NASA just handed them over, and they became a prop in the movie. They also got a ton of footage from NASA that was of Apollo. It was Apollo footage from 1960 all the way up to 1972. So they handed that over to them. And I believe it was during this Q&A that I was watching about Operation Avalanche where Matt Johnson said, because a certain department at NASA closed down, his studio of like 9 people in his creative studio are now technically the largest holders of NASA film footage on the planet, which is just insane. I also learned from an interview that most of this movie's budget was used on music licensing and legal fees, if you can believe that. Around this is also wild. Matt Johnson and his crew would straight up ask some of the NASA staff and employees to just change into these clothes. And most of them said yes. Most of them were willing to change into old-timey 60s clothes. And those who didn't, they just went in post-production and they digitally painted on period-accurate clothing. So kind of a really interesting way to get around that and kind of further sell this era that they're trying to depict. Speaking of post-production, there are nearly 300 VFX shots in this movie, and it was all done by one visual effects artist named Stephen Davies, who did a lot of work on like Marvel and DC projects, and his work here is incredible. It's crazy that he was a one-man band, and the stuff that he does in this movie is just mind-blowing, but we'll get into that later. So, the film itself. It all starts in 1965 when the CIA recruits the top 25 students from Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. And of course, our main characters consist of some of these students, but more specifically, they become the CIA's AV department. And the intro of the movie is JFK's "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech, and then it's followed up with footage of our main characters kind of messing around with their newfound AV equipment in the CIA quarters. But back to JFK's iconic speech, it riled up America and it got them amped and ready to land on the moon, to be the first ones there. So that put a lot of pressure on NASA, and they had a mission to land a man on the moon by the year of 1969, or will have otherwise, in the eyes of the world, lost the Cold War to the Soviets. It's also here where we learn that the KGB allegedly sent a mole into NASA, and James Webb, who's the director of NASA at the time, completely denies Russian presence in NASA, and so this means the CIA has to send in their top agents in order to do some undercover investigating. Very much like the Dirties, Operation Avalanche sets up its characters and its story within minutes through the expert use of documentary filmmaking. We first meet Matt, Owen, Jared, and Andy, who are the cameramen, 4 of the 25 recruited students. They've been working for the CIA in Virginia for a year, and they have great ambition. They present their original idea of discovering the Soviet mole to a higher up via documentary, the movie's opening, but they get shot down. Rather than just sending in a bunch of CIA agents posing as rocket scientists, who are probably going to be spotted a mile away by any Russian mole, Matt and Owen devise a plan to instead send in themselves and Andy and Jared posing as a documentary film crew who have absolutely no idea what's going on. Matt and the gang want to pretend that they're part of the National Education Television Network, and that their in to NASA will be that they're there to chart the race to the moon. And, of course, this idea is kind of questioned by CIA official Brackett, who asks, okay, hey, that's a good idea, but why would anyone, especially the Russian mole, allow anyone to openly film them? To which Matt cleverly responds that this entire meeting that they've been having was secretly being filmed through the window. And Brackett and the other CIA officials kind of look around behind them to see that they've secretly been on camera the whole time. And with that, Matt and the gang are given a budget and they're on their way to NASA with their first big real mission, Operation Zipper. So with Matt, Owen, and the other guys on their way to Texas, we get a nice little road trip montage here with a tongue-in-cheek use of Bad Moon Rising by CCR. And a detail that I really appreciate here is that all of the road signs they pass, they all look as they would have back in the 60s. Once inside NASA, Matt and the gang sell themselves as a television crew. They're given an office and they fall under absolutely no suspicion. But their first real plan of action is to wiretap NASA director James Webb's office phone. And here's where we get a pretty funny scene where there's a display of how the wiretapping on the phones works, where Matt secretly wiretaps Owen's phone, of course unbeknownst to Owen, and listens in on an intimate conversation between Owen and his wife. Owen kind of hears Matt chuckling and he unscrews the bottom of his phone on the speaker end, and he realizes his phone's been wiretapped, and he's obviously pissed at Matt, and the two get into their first of many fights. More importantly, though, we learn through a telephonic conversation with James Webb and another member of NASA that the rocket scientists have built an ineffective lunar lander and probably won't be able to actually land a man on the moon and come back for another 5 years. Matt immediately gets on the phone with CIA Director Brackett and tells him this bombshell of information, to which Brackett responds that Matt and the crew need to pull themselves from NASA and get off this mission so they can send in more well-trained agents. This obviously comes as a huge disappointment to Matt. It's at this moment where Matt gets a projector and he watches Georges Méliès's A Trip to the Moon, which is a 1902 French illusionist film about a group of astronauts who take a fantastical trip to the moon. And therein lies the newfound plan. Matt and his crew could fake the moon landing. But Matt isn't so sure that Brackett and the other guys are going to be on board with this plan, so he pretends that Brackett gave him the go-ahead, and he creates a fake briefing from the CIA that's labeled Operation Avalanche. When Matt tells the group about Operation Avalanche, it's safe to say that he's a lot more on board with the idea than Owen is. On the one hand, if they pull this off, they'll look like geniuses. But the whole plan hinges on lying to the American people, and Owen feels more than a little guilty about that. Nevertheless, Matt and Owen steal a spacesuit from NASA and drive out to a nearby beach where they shoot black and white footage at night that will, in theory, become the moon landing footage. When the crew returns to their office in NASA, it's not soon after this that Brackett and another CIA agent named Bowles burst into their office in hopes to shut down Operation Avalanche and send the boys back to Virginia. It's here where the rest of Matt's crew realizes that the idea was never ever approved by the CIA, that the whole thing was orchestrated by Matt. However, in a last-ditch effort, Matt shows the footage they shot the previous night to director Brackett. It's shot at 48 frames per second, it's turned down to slow motion, and it looks fairly believable, at least to Brackett anyway. So now Brackett actually officially approves the plan, and Matt and the gang are given the go-ahead to go forward with Operation Avalanche. However, Owen is pretty understandably mad at Matt here, the fact that he went behind his back and didn't just tell him the truth, and this starts to strain the two's relationship a little bit. At a celebratory party, Matt is told by CIA agent Bowles that Bowles is actually going to be the one in charge of this mission, that Matt doesn't know what he's doing, and that he needs to stop going behind the CIA's back. And so there's kind of a power shift here that Matt is visibly upset about. And to make matters worse, after the party, the gang looks over some of the footage they shot and find out that right outside the party, there are two men watching, and one of them even has a Super 8 camera in hand. Who are these men? Not only that, but Agent Bowles shoots down Matt and Owen's footage of the moon landing as not believable enough. So, it's back to the drawing board. There is a bit of good news here, though. Matt, through a geologist at NASA, learns that there are actually a few locations on Earth that have similar surfaces to that of the moon, Behringer's crater and the Grand Canyon, to name a couple. So the new plan is to go to these locations in hopes that they'll sell as the actual moon better than a beach would. More bad news. Owen is still mad at Matt about going behind his back, and so he refuses to go on this cross-country trip to shoot more footage, even though Matt clearly needs him. All of Johnson's work, including his television series and his latest film Blackberry, deal with friendship in some way or another, and how those type of relationships can be compromised in larger-than-life situations. So with that in mind, Matt is left with Agent Bowles, who he's clearly not a big fan of, but it's these two who have to go on this cross-country road trip, and there's a great montage here where we see them jumping from location to location, shooting footage, and making small talk, chief of which being Matt and Owen's strained relationship. This montage comes to a screeching halt with a comedic cut to Matt and the gang back in their NASA office, overlooking the footage that they shot, looking absolutely nothing like the real moon. It becomes painfully clear to the gang that if they're really gonna fake the moon landing, they're gonna need to find something that looks incredibly similar to the source. Owen takes a jab at Matt, saying that they either need to find a real director or just give up on the project entirely. Cut to Matt trying to get a hold of Stanley Kubrick. So if you know anything about the moon landing being faked conspiracy, you know that Stanley Kubrick is heavily tied to it. And why that is there's a big theory that Stanley Kubrick used his 2001 A Space Odyssey set to fake the moon landing. He used this as a set to kind of shoot with actors there to trick all of America into thinking that we actually landed a man on the moon, when in reality, we didn't. That's what the conspiracy says. But what I like about this movie is they don't just randomly get a hold of Stanley Kubrick. There was actually some pre-existing history with Matt and Stanley Kubrick before the movie even begins. Before they even pitched the idea of going to NASA to the CIA board, we see them presenting a smaller project they worked on called Operation Red, in which they tried to prove or disprove that Stanley Kubrick is a member of the Communist Party. Obviously, they find out that he's not, but I like that this little bit of info we get at the beginning comes back into play later. It makes the movie feel a lot more tight, and everything feels really thought out because of stuff like this. So, in his motel, Matt makes a bunch of phone calls trying to get a hold of Stanley Kubrick, most of which failing. But he finally gets the right person on the line, and he finds out through this phone call that Stanley Kubrick is shooting a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey, which features a moon landing. So, he also learns that there are two NASA scientists on set advising Kubrick. So if they can get on the set and pretend to be interviewers there for the two NASA scientists, they can hopefully get some footage and coverage and information, anything they can, about the moon set to help them build their own realistic, authentic moon. And so with hopes of getting onto the 2001 set, Matt and the gang head off to England, armed with cameras secretly hidden inside bags. The Space Odyssey set sequence is one of my absolute favorites in this entire movie. We get to see the entire set. We get to see astronaut actors sitting on their set chairs. We get to see the moon set itself, recreated astrotech, and of course, the main attraction himself, Stanley Kubrick. The process of getting Stanley Kubrick and the Space Odyssey set in this movie is extremely fascinating. At first, Matt Johnson, he thought it'd be pretty easy. Just take the video footage from the Space Odyssey set and green screen himself into it. Kind of similar to what they did with the archival footage in Forrest Gump. However, here's where things get tricky. Stanley Kubrick was so secretive about Space Odyssey. He didn't want any interviewers, any video cameras, or anything like that on set. And so there's almost no usable video footage of Stanley Kubrick or the Space Odyssey set in existence. In fact, Stanley Kubrick even went as far as to destroy the set and a lot of the props used on the movie. So it's kind of like all the evidence went up in a blaze. So with that, all Matt and the gang were left with were stills, behind-the-scenes photo stills of Space Odyssey. That's all they had to go off of. But they knew they really wanted to include Stanley Kubrick in this movie, because you can't really have a conspiracy moon landing movie without Stanley Kubrick involved in some way, shape, or form. And so here's where things get pretty wild. Visual effects artist Tristan Zarafa came up with the idea to take high-resolution stills of behind-the-scenes photos of 2001, composite Matt into the stills, and then make the images move in post-production as though they're video. They did a sort of 3D projection to turn the photos into a 3D space. The Operation Avalanche crew shot as much real footage on a soundstage as they could to then composite into the 2001 behind-the-scenes stills, including onto Kubrick himself. They used an actor to work as Kubrick and the other actors' bodies, and then they composited his head onto the actor. It's pretty insane stuff, and the result is an incredible scene. The scene also acts as a way to move the story along, as Matt learns that a technique that Kubrick used to make it look like the men were on the moon in 2001 was called front screen projection. So Matt gets on the phone and he excitedly tells this information to Owen, who basically shuts him down and gives the phone over to Bowles, who of course Matt much less excitedly relays this info to. The new plan? To rent out a studio in Texas and hire a crew to not only build a set of the moon, but also a replica of a lunar lander. Matt and the gang have the perfect cover. They're already pretending to be filming a documentary, and so it's not out of the realm of possibilities that they would be building this lunar lander and a moon set to act as recreation material or backgrounds for interviews, whatever the case. The only people who need to be in the know of the faux moon landing are cooperative astronauts and NASA director James Webb, who of course, if he doesn't agree with, they'll have to just move on without him. In a stroke of genius, while presenting this idea to the CIA, Matt states that the command module that circulates the moon and sends radio signals back to mission control will eventually travel over the dark side of the moon, offering a 30-minute window in which Matt and his team can televise NASA's previously recorded data of successful lunar landings, as well as the footage they shoot of the faux moon landing. If they slip their pre-recorded footage into the live television event, they will have successfully fooled all of America. This advancement in Operation Avalanche gets the CIA go-ahead. However, Matt learns a bit of disturbing information here. The CIA actually has a plan B if Operation Avalanche doesn't work, and the title given to this plan is Operation Northwoods, in which the plan would be to shoot down Apollo 11 with all of the crew inside and then blame it on the Soviets. So now, the lives of the Apollo 11 crew lie in Matt's hands, and this is a moment that perfectly raises the stakes of the movie. The raising of stakes here also gives Matt the opportunity to do a little self-reflection. There's a great scene where Matt sits in his motel room and watches archival footage of introductory of the crew of Apollo 11, who they are as people, what their family lives are like, just everything about them. And he kind of watches somberly. He kind of realizes that he may have gone too far, and he didn't really think about the ramifications of Operation Avalanche, but now he's in too deep. Not only that, but NASA Director James Webb also publicly announces his retirement effective October 7th, 1968, which shows that he did not want to cooperate with Operation Avalanche. Matt goes to visit Owen and his wife Julie in the hospital. Julie had just had a baby, so Matt goes to see the baby, see how they're doing and everything like that. But Owen pulls Matt aside and tells him that he thinks the two men that were watching with the Super 8 camera at the party are actually Russians. He said they need to get off of Operation Avalanche effective immediately. Matt, of course, says that Owen's just being paranoid. A little later, we see Matt and his crew go over to their studio in Texas to check out the newly built moon set and lunar lander. And they look great. As the guys are in the studio planning their next move of action, they realize that there are two guys outside of the studio watching them. Are they Soviets? Maybe Owen wasn't being so paranoid after all. So Matt and the gang go outside to approach these men and kind of ask them what they're doing. When the car peels out, another man gets inside the car and they drive off. The guys chase after them on foot for a bit. Matt and Jared get into Matt's car, and Bowles fires his gun at these two unknown men. Matt and Jared drive in their car, driving as fast as they can to catch them. Matt even tries to get Jared to film and zoom in on their license plate, but before they can do that, Matt's car stalls, which was a previously established issue with his car earlier in the movie, and the car breaks down and kind of hits a wall, and the unknown men drive off and get away. The next day, Agent Bowles relays some CIA information. One of the men that was outside the studio watching them was a KGB agent named Antonin Lotsky, who was also the planted mole in NASA all along. Supposedly. The bad news in all of this is that Lotsky did reveal something while being interrogated. The Soviets are planning on landing on the moon a lot sooner than the CIA predicted, being the end of 1969. And so this puts Operation Avalanche on a much tighter schedule. They'll need to be completed no later than April of '69. Furthermore, Owen discovers upon reviewing their year-old NASA interviews that they actually interviewed Lotsky. Through this, he also discovers that it was also Lotsky who was on the phone with James Webb stating that the Apollo 11 mission was not yet ready. And we learn that Owen doesn't even think that Lotsky is the Russian mole, but rather a fall guy that was hired by the CIA. He thinks that two CIA agents have been following them the whole entire time, including the two men that they saw outside of the studio and the two men that they saw outside of the party with the Super 8 camera. He believes that Matt himself and the rest of the crew are within a conspiracy theory and that the CIA has been lying to them all along. Regardless, however, Matt and the gang have no choice but to continue and complete Operation Avalanche. Tension aside, some of the best bits of the movie come from the process of actually faking the moon landing. One of these scenes is when they take and develop the famous moon landing photos. They use their forward projection methods to blend their stage in with the background, replace the space helmet's mask reflections by pasting something over it, blacking out the space background with litho ink, and painting in moon surface textures over the photos. It's a fascinating process, and would probably be very similar to how a team of experts would have faked the moon landing back then, had it actually been faked. As they continue to film more moon landing footage and take more photos, Matt and Owen learn that Lotsky was recently found dead. Owen thinks that the CIA killed him because he knew too much and he was talking to Director Webb, and he thinks that he and the crew are next. Owen lets his paranoia spill over on the moon landing set. He openly accuses Agent Bowles of letting those two CIA agents outside of the set escape, missing the gunshots that he took at them on purpose. And Bowles retaliates by saying that Owen was trying to get Matt removed from the Operation Avalanche mission, calling Brackett to try and convince him all along. This causes a physical fight to break out between Matt and Owen on the moon landing set. Owen is still in his full astronaut costume, and so this is a really funny scene to watch, but it does cause yet another rift in Matt and Owen's friendship. All of the moon landing footage is shot, and Bowles states that they now need to destroy everything because it's all evidence. He tells Matt, "Good work," which is a small little payoff to Matt's longtime search for Bowles' approval. And Matt is conflicted. He's angry at Owen, but he's also starting to believe him. He straight up asks Bowles if Lotsky was actually the mole, to which Bowles responds, "What are you talking about?" in a tone that reads very suspicious. Matt then gathers all of the footage shot for Operation Avalanche, and he splices together a cut that reveals all of the CIA secrets that were captured during the filming of this project. Matt labels this film reel Operation Avalanche, drives out to the country, and buries it. It's the day of the Apollo 11 launch. All of the live televised footage that's leading up to the actual launch is being cross-cut with Matt burning all of the evidence that they used on Operation Avalanche. So then Matt returns to his office at NASA and receives a phone call from Owen, who's saying that there are two CIA agents watching him from outside of his home, and that Matt needs to immediately meet Owen at his motel. Matt enters his motel room to find that it's been absolutely turned upside down by the CIA, who are now right outside looking for him. Matt knows that he can't leave his motel room now because the only way out is through the front door that leads directly to the CIA agents. So he knocks on a nearby wall, realizes that there's another room right on the other side. So he busts through the drywall, enters through a bathroom in the other room, and then leaves out that front door because it's facing the back side of the motel. It's a really cool scene, and hearing about how they shot it was pretty interesting. Apparently they went into a motel room, built a fake drywall, and then busted through that. They had Matt enter into the same room, but they basically flipped everything to make it look like an entirely new room. So now Matt and Andy are on the run. Matt tries to call Owen, to no avail. Matt then goes back to his film burial site and digs up his Operation Avalanche reel, taking it with him. It's then that the two men realize that they were followed to the burial site by CIA agents. They hop in their car and drive as fast as they can, thus putting the audience through a thrilling camera POV car chase. The CIA slams into Matt's car. They even fire guns at Matt and Andy. It's a really intense sequence. Andy tries to catch the agents' faces on camera. The CIA agents continue shooting at Matt's car, blasting out the windows. Matt's car stalls again at the most unfortunate of times. The CIA car pulls in front of them, and the agent with the gun fires multiple shots through Matt's windshield. He and Andy are trapped. However, Matt gets his car to start again and has no choice but to drive in reverse, and the chase continues. Matt attempts to spin the car around and drive forward, and the CIA car rams them off the road. Matt's able to keep the car steady, gets it back on the road, and they drive off, finally losing the CIA agents, if only momentarily. So this car chase scene was shot at the very end of Operation Avalanche's production, and from the sounds of it, the crew pretty much winged it. It's not really often that you see a car chase in a documentary film. However, it's shot the exact same way as the rest of the movie, and so it kind of gives the audience the feeling that they're a part of the action. The scene wasn't completed without issue, though, as multiple cameras and cars were wrecked during the making of it. However, they did it, and it results in the most harrowing moment in the film by far. Matt returns to Owen's house and searches for him desperately, but can't find him anywhere. He finally goes to the back of his house, opens the garage door, and finds Owen inside, hanging. He realizes here that the CIA killed Owen because he knew too much and that he was too late to save him. It's a devastating moment, especially because a car pulls up, Matt runs to the backyard because he thinks it's the CIA. But then after a few moments pass, he realizes it's actually Owen's wife, Julie, along with her baby. She walks inside the house, not even going towards the garage, kind of is probably doing her day-to-day stuff inside the house. And Matt goes up, walks up to the front door. He stares at it for a while, but he can't go inside. He can't tell Julie about anything that happened because it's going to compromise her and the baby. It's a really heartbreaking moment. So the remaining crew members meet in a secluded location. Matt gives Andy the film reel that he spliced together, and he tells him, "When I know where we're going, I'll call you," alluding to the fact that the Operation Avalanche crew are now going on the run. Everything blew up so fast. What originally was an exciting mission that was going to get Matt and his friends big promotions at the CIA became a traumatizing conspiracy that they all fell victim to. Even as things started to unravel and become more tense, Matt admittedly may have found that to be a little thrilling. However, all of that's gone now, and he's lost his best friend. We then get a scene where Matt calls CIA Director Brackett from a payphone right outside of a restaurant that Brackett's eating at. He immediately calls Brackett a real piece of shit, which, fair. And then he says that he'll give his own location to Brackett as long as Brackett gives him a list of the names of the people on the CIA's kill team. Matt stacks his hand by telling Brackett about his Operation Avalanche reel that proves the whole fake moon landing and that Owen was killed to cover up the fact that he was the one to walk on the moon. Brackett offers to give Matt his own department as a deal to not spill the beans, even saying that he can keep the film as collateral. He tells Matt to think about it. Matt walks away from the phone booth and into a nearby downtown area. He sees a group of people watching a TV that sits in a store's display window. It's televising the moon landing that he helped fake. Matt watches the televised event with a blank face. Is he pleased in any way? Sickened with himself and the CIA? Whatever the case, the film cuts to credits, and we watch archival footage of the entire country celebrating Operation Avalanche's achievement. It's a pretty chilling ending, and it's all set to CCR's Fortunate Son. What I love about this movie so much is that it's such an effective historical fiction. It's very believable. Obviously, I myself don't believe the moon landing was faked. No one behind the scenes of this movie thinks that either. But for an hour and a half, they completely sell you on the idea because they take everything seriously. There's no wink wink nudge nudge stuff going on. It's all played straight. All the characters, treat the situation with full severity, and they take such an attention to detail in this movie that I admire so much. Like I said, the actual shooting of the faux moon landing is so entertaining. The stuff of, the trial and error of trying to shoot it at the beach and then trying to shoot it at the Grand Canyon before they finally realize they have to build a set and build a lunar lander. All of this stuff they have to take into account. There's even a small little thing I didn't mention before where when they're saying how they're going to televise the event, because everything that they shot is going to be on film, they have a process of needing to clean out the film, make sure there's not a hair, a speck of dust or dirt, anything like that could distort the image and let on to the fact that it was pre-recorded. It's just everything is so well thought out, and that's why this works so well. You feel as paranoid as the characters in the movie. It's a really, really solid piece of work, and I personally believe that it's Matt Johnson's finest. It's kind of funny, during a Q&A that I watched for this movie, Matt Johnson said that NASA has publicly said that they denounce this movie, they hate it, and everyone involved should be ashamed, this and that. But he also said that there was a showing of this movie in Texas, and a lot of NASA staff were there, and they were laughing. They seemed to openly enjoy the movie. So I'm sure it's probably some mixed emotions. I'm sure the higher-ups of NASA don't like this movie. But it was kind of funny to hear that some people who work for the company do actually enjoy it. So I found that to be pretty amusing. But yeah, it's all in all a really good movie. I love both of these films. I think The Dirties is a incredible feature debut for Johnson, and I also think that Operation Avalanche is a great follow-up. I think it's a really, really solid movie, and it shows just how well that Matt and his team are able to utilize the mockumentary filmmaking style so well. We see a little bit of this in Blackberry too. I think Blackberry is definitely the closest thing that they've done to a traditional narrative, but it does have some elements of Matt Johnson's established style. I think it's cool that even on a bigger movie like Blackberry, Matt Johnson's style is still able to shine through. And if I didn't know any better going into the movie, I would be able to instantly recognize that it's one of his films. So during this episode, I've mentioned Blackberry a couple times, and there's a reason for that. On the next episode of Nerd Theater, I'm going to be talking about Blackberry, so I'm kind of doing a back-to-back spotlight on all of Matt Johnson's work. He's a fascinating filmmaker. He's taking a lot of risks that you're not really seeing as much in modern cinema, and I really like that. I think it'd be cool to follow this episode up with his latest feature film, so be sure to stick around for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of spotlight on the Dirties and Operation Avalanche. I think they're both prime examples of how well you can utilize this type of filmmaking to tell a really interesting story in a unique way. So as always, guys, thank you for watching, and until next time, stay tuned, you guys.